I want to dive into an area of focus that we really emphasize with our clients because obviously there's massive results from there. And I think it's one area that we haven't touched on for a while in this group. So just want to go through it with you today and really knuckle down that if you are already starting to get some exercise in, ultimately you want to make sure, I think everybody wants to make sure they're making the most of their time. They're not just wasting their time. Okay, so going to dive into a couple of things here. If you have any questions as we dive deeper, let me know as we see some guys jump on. Hey, Aaron, great to have you on, mate, and Ed. So anyone else watching, just say comment live below. It'd be great to see you're on. And then any questions down the line, happy to answer them. All right. Cool. So should be able to see on the screen. We're going to dive into obviously weights for fat loss, making sure that we can really ignite the afterburn as we're going to dive into what that means, how you can implement it, and making sure if we are getting some workouts in over the course of your week, you're making sure that it's actually effective. Okay. If you're already busting your ass, already putting time in, you want to make sure you're actually getting something out of it. You're getting a return on investment. Okay. Or return on that sweat equity, as I like to call it. So diving in. First point here, or what I'm going to cover, why you should kind of stick around, is going to be these main 4 points. I'm going to run through things quite quickly. And if there's anything else, just let me know. Hey, Teresa, good to have you on. So the first part here is going to be why it's so much harder right now. What I mean by that is, what worked when you're 25 is not going to work when you're 45. And if things aren't budging, things aren't moving like they used to. Hey, Geoff, great to have you on. It's been a while since I've seen you. It's going to be diving into understanding what's different now if you're in your 40s, 50s, how you should be approaching it a bit smarter. So you're not just trying to run or bike or outwork this increasing waistline. Okay, so building things back up there and giving you a bit of an action step. Second part here is going to be why weight training is so effective, why there needs to be some sort of implementation there. It's not really a case of if or should. I'll tell you that right now. Weight training really should be a part of your program. And if it's not, you're missing out on quite a lot. Okay. Next part here is really going to get an understanding of what really matters deeper down. Alan and Andrew, good to have you on. Getting an idea of obviously nutrition piece is hugely important. We dive into that every week and making sure that inflammation is taken into account, how your liver and hormones is functioning, obviously that gut health piece, but knowing that training and how we're training, how that stress is interacting with our body and making sure we're heading in the right direction, not just actually pulling ourselves backwards, is going to help a lot. And then we're going to finish off on, if you haven't started, if you're a bit stuck on first steps, then we can really knuckle down on that and go a little deeper as well. Okay, so if you do feel a little stuck, the body's not responding, things aren't working like they used to, this is certainly an area that I want to break down. I've done a couple of podcast interviews recently where this has come up, so I thought it'd be quite helpful to share with you. First one is exercise stress, right? So the main thing is that there's 3 main stresses on the body. Any one of these is obviously going to hinder progress and it's going to really hold us back. So the first one here is that exercise stress. And although for a lot of people, it's a case of if you're sitting on your bum all day and you're not getting any exercise in, then obviously getting some exercise in will be helpful. If you're over-exercising, then obviously that's detrimental as well. So either one, I think most people kind of understand that if you're over-exercising, overtraining as they call it, is going to be an issue too. But the third option there is with a lot of our guys, if you are really coming through where you're really working towards a project deadline, you're running your own business, whatever that might be, there's a level of burning the candle with both ends that we really need to be aware of, okay? Because even though it's physical stress in a different sense, you're running around, you're never sitting down, your body's never really, it's always in that fight or flight stress response. And if you're trying to force yourself to the gym, even though you feel terrible, you feel sluggish and you're not giving yourself that break, then adding more exercise stress on top is going to pull you backwards rather than help you forwards. Okay, so really being mindful of building that base is always going to be step number 1. Okay, step number 2, we're going to dive into that gut and digestive stress. That's a massive part that we dive into every single week. This is a big part of phase 1, 2, and 10 for all of our clients when we dive into building up that gut health, making sure that inflammation and toxicity isn't holding you back. And believe me, it does hold a lot of people back. And then the last one here is a mental stress. And this is always a fascinating topic. If there's an excessive amount of sort of fatigue coming through, there's an excessive amount of toxicity, a lot of that can really come back to mental stress as well, because our body holds mental stress physically, right? It's going to show physically. And if we are overwhelmed, anxious, depressed regularly, that's really going to show through in our physical markers and our physical health as well. Okay, so really being able to identify all 3 areas is going to be really, really important if you want to get things back on track. And if you feel like things aren't responding, you want to make sure that you're taking them into account. Okay, so we're going to knuckle right in and dive into this afterburn effect. And this is going to be really the key conversation around why weight training is so important, so effective. at trying to make sure we can really move forward. Now, before I dive in, there's some really cool 3D features I found on our PowerPoint slides. So they're pretty cool. I'm a car guy, so I appreciate that one. But the main thing here, and this is the question I'll ask you, is to really start to break down that conversation around weight training versus cardio. What should I use to burn body fat? The easiest way I can use to explain this is, imagine you jump in the blue car and you drive as fast as possible to point A, from point A to point B, and then you turn off the car. Okay, so we've burnt off, nice big powerful car. We've burnt off, say, a good 6 liters on the way to that area, and then we turn it off, and then obviously we burn no more fuel. Okay, energy, fuel, it's going to be the same thing. So we drive in the car from point A to point B, and then we turn off the car. We've burnt 6 liters of fuel. Now, what we're going to do in old trusty the truck here, we're going to drive that same distance just on a good old pace. We're still going to be pushing things pretty hard, but we're going to go to A to B. And then once we get to A to B, we may have only burnt 4 or 5 liters of petrol. But what we're now going to do is we're going to leave that truck on. We're going to keep things just humming along for the next 24 hours, okay, and come back tomorrow, okay? And now what we've done is now burn another 5, 6, 7 liters over the course of that 24 hours by just letting things go along for that time frame. It's probably going to be more, but the point remains, what we're doing with weight training is essentially you're the truck, okay? You're having a good workout. We're not overstressing the body. We're simply creating a stimulus. But then once we finish the workout, now the really heavy lifting is being done. Okay, so it's going to be more like 10 rather than 6 liters. Because what's going to happen is we're now letting the body respond and repair from the micro damage that's being done during that workout to a muscle, right? And that's going to expend more energy. So what this is creating is more of a thermic effect and what we call the afterburn effect of fat burning long term. Okay, so rather than getting on the treadmill, okay, this could be the example you're using on an exercise analogy, is if we're jumping on the treadmill and we're on there for 30 minutes, we're counting our steps, we're doing a certain amount of time, whatever it might be, and then we get off. We burn a certain amount of calories on that machine, on that exercise path, and then as soon as we stop, we don't move forward. Okay, and this is where you see a lot of guys who are doing half Ironmans, and you see they're still 40, 50 kilos overweight, right? These are the guys that are straggling along. They're doing an incredible distance, but they're still overweight. And it's because unless you do more and more and more and more, right? What becomes a 5K run, 10K run, 15, 20, and you keep going, unless you really create a massive new amount of stimulus, cardio long-term is really ineffective. Okay, in the short term, if you've gone from nothing to adding in a 5K run, fantastic. It's more than nothing. It's movement, and keep going. But what you'll find is as you get to 6 months of doing that, you'll find that you're not getting the same results. It might even be 1 to 2 months, right? Your body responds quite quickly. Whereas what we can do with a weight training standpoint is we've got so many more variables that we can play with, right? Weight's obviously one, but then we've got the density of the workouts, we've got, which is like rest times, we've got the speed at which we do reps, the progression of the workouts, the volume of the workouts. There's so many variables that we really sequence out, and this is where progression is really important too, to make sure that we're making the most of that time, but then the heavy lifting is really done the next 24, 48 hours afterwards, where our bodies have to recover and repair from that weight training session, okay? So what happens with, regardless of whether you build muscle or drop body fat, is really going to come down to nutrition and making sure that side of things is covered. If you're absolutely fresh to weight training, the ideal is both. You're actually going to increase your muscle mass and drop the body fat, which is going to mean overall you've got a higher metabolic effect and you're going to burn more body fat longer, or at a higher rate. You can actually eat more food. But the second part there is also that if depending on where we eat, if we overeat, we're going to build muscle. If we undereat, then we're going to be dropping the body fat. And if we push it too far, then we're going to be under recovering. But the idea is still the same, is trying to make sure that what we're looking for is initiating essentially that stimulus, that response that we're after, in order to make sure that we can really move forward and understand that we're getting that body humming along on the back burner while we continue throughout our day. All right. So we're looking at this process of just being as effective as possible with our time. Hopefully that gives you a nice analogy at how weight training really works. Okay, rather than just doing some exercise and then stopping the exercise and no more benefit, we're getting in, we're creating that stimulus and that thermic response in the body, upgrading the metabolism so that over the next 24, 48 hours after the workout, we're still burning the extra energy. We've still got our bodies on our side to burn more body fat. Okay, cool. So why weights? Obviously, hopefully that's already built the argument for you, but diving deeper into that, what we're looking at doing is we're improving hormone function. This is everything from testosterone to insulin to growth hormone to all these things that are massively important to everything from cognitive function to joint health to everything deeper down. The second benefit is you're able to eat more, right? Like I said, with that afterburn, with that ability, that higher thermic effect long term, you're actually going to be burning more energy long term. So you actually get away with more. And the more we can train effectively in this way, you can actually eat more and more and more. And I've just had 3 or 4 examples this week alone. Guys telling me they're eating twice as much as they used to eat. They feel fantastic. Their energy is really high, and they're still dropping kilos off their frame because they're starting to implement this stuff. One, they got their nutrition point sorted and making sure they feel healthy, but 2, now we're implementing a level of exercise that allows them to move forward. Okay. The third one here, which is always overlooked, but if we're exercising properly, we're actually able to increase the mobility, which is essentially the strength and function of a joint and range. Okay. And making sure that joints actually function. If we don't use it, we lose it. Okay. And if we're sitting down at a desk all day, the best thing we can do is get those joints into range and make sure things are functioning. Okay. It's less about flexibility and it's more about mobility. Flexibility is not passively in that range. Okay. If you're flexible but not mobile, you're actually going to get a lot more injured long term because we can flex and stretch into these ranges, but we're not strong there. Okay. So really big opportunity for injury there. So trying to make sure that we keep it to being strong in those ranges. And the only way to do that is to create some sort of tension on that muscle in that range and build up that stress. Okay. And the fourth one here is something I'm going to have to explain a little bit more, but generally less fatigue. Okay. Rather than constantly running, biking, and doing more of the cardio, although they're certainly effective. I'm not saying remove them entirely. I'm not going to be that dogmatic, but trying to make sure that we do have some level of weight training. You'll notice that there's a lot less overall fatigue because we're not just hammering the same metabolic system. We can start to work into more of the central nervous system. We can start to work into some of these other energy systems, which allows us throughout our day not to be damaging and pushing down the same energy source, that same metabolism or process that's going on. Okay. So big one here is just making sure that we rev up the system, right? So by adding in more weight training, by making sure that, this could simply be 1 or 2 workouts a week, right? Nothing crazy. We're not going 5, 6 workouts a week. And for most people, that's actually going to be detrimental unless you have that base sorted and have the time to do so. Okay. So like I said, if we're really stepping things up, there's going to be better nutrient uptake so we can actually absorb more nutrients or make better use of them. And we can also make sure we actually get away with more food if we're weight training. Second one here is obviously better testosterone levels. It's going to massive difference across the board to your strength, endurance, your sexual performance, your energy throughout the day, as well as obviously general muscle tone and all the other good things that come along with that. Okay, that's going to be male and female. Next one here is obviously insulin sensitivity. The more we weight train, the more we have an ability to actually use carbohydrates better and make sure we're not storing body fat from things like carbohydrates as much. Okay, much more of a response or a chemical response happening there from weight training as opposed to normal cardio. The fourth one here is going to be better cognitive focus. And this is an area where a lot of people are not aware of, is when we actually exercise more, there's actually a lot more going on and the brain will be sharper throughout the day, will be more cognitively sharp. But at the same time, by getting more weight workouts in, you'll find there's better neural plasticity. Okay, so this concept of once you're over 30, you can't learn anything new is complete BS. Obviously, you can keep learning things until the day you die. Okay, if we do more weight training, we do more exercise there, it's going to allow us to even be able to retain more things. It's going to allow us to learn more things faster as well. Okay. And then the last one here, breathing control. Now, this very much is the assumption that you're doing weight training properly and being mindful in how you're breathing while you're weight training, taking the time to control the movements and really align that with your breath is something we go through a lot with our guys. It makes a huge difference across the board to your HRV, to your breathing, to your recovery. A lot of markers that are going to be very helpful to overall health and performance. Okay. I did touch on this, so I do want to just dive into this. I could dive into this all day long, but one thing I do want to dive into here and allow you to give yourself a bit of understanding is the difference between flexibility and mobility. Okay, flexibility is, to be honest, to me, completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter if we can get to a range, if we're not strong there, if we don't have the active ability to maintain control in that position. Okay, if we're passively stretching into a range, all we're doing is going beyond what we can obviously control. And then we're putting ourselves in a position where we're telling the muscle to relax where it's unstable. If we start loading that position or we're constantly going there, then there's a much higher likelihood of injury. Okay. So being aware that there's a difference between full range of motion for an exercise, say a squat or a deadlift or whatever it might be, and your active range. Okay. So taking that time to really get an understanding of what that is for you is an assessment that is going to be crucial in your longevity of exercise training and really just your function of your body. So knowing how far you're coming down onto a bench press is as far as you can maintain that position with chest up, shoulders down, rather than just kind of pulling through the rep. It's a case of when you go down to a squat, we're keeping and maintaining a neutral spine, and we're not allowing the hips to tuck at the bottom. Okay, there's going to be a big difference between full range of motion and your active range. Okay, the next part here is obviously flexible but weak, and we see this a lot with guys that are. We've seen do a lot of yoga, a lot of Pilates, more yoga in the past, where they've stretched or they've just got into a routine of stretching every morning and doing more on that side of things. And although it's a nice and it's a beneficial routine from more of the breathing standpoint, from a recovery standpoint, from a more blood flow standpoint, from an actual better function of the body is very negligible. Okay, so getting an idea of making that change and really understanding the mobility aspect and getting yourself strong in certain ranges is much more important. Okay, now the word mobility I've been really hesitant to use for a long time, simply because a lot of people confuse it with foam rollers and rolling out on balls and shit like that. That is it certainly has its place and can be very helpful, but a lot of times people are getting in a position of trying to manipulate how their body functions without really understanding how things should function. Okay, and if you simply understand that the tightness of a muscle is coming in because of an instability in a joint, and there's typically something that is underactive, underfiring, and that can be improved and corrected through effective exercise and re-strengthening, makes a huge difference long term. Okay, this is an area of expertise I was focused on for 5-6 years, and we can dive really deep. So we'll keep it surface level for now, but just trying to make sure that that level of strength plus flexibility means mobility. Okay, or range plus strength, as I've written there. Okay, cool. Hope that makes sense so far. Diving into a little deeper and getting an idea of, for you right now, some clear action steps that you need to put in. If you're in your 40s and 50s, heck, anything over 25, you need, or really anybody needs a level of stimulus in order to function properly. Okay, as we get older, if we don't do anything about it, our muscle mass will slowly decline. You'll start to see that you start to lose range, you start to lose strength, and obviously that muscle tone tends to go with it as well. Okay, so the only way that you're going to stop that, and especially that happens, we're going to dive into certain muscle groups that does happen, is trying to make sure that we're creating some level of stimulus. So like I said, even if it's just 1 to 2 workouts a week, the amount of benefit that accumulates long term, that compound effect of being able to get those workouts in, is something you're going to thank yourself for when you get to your 70s and 80s. Okay, I guarantee that. I've had 1 or 2 clients in their 70s who are still doing 10 plus push-ups. They feel fantastic and they're out running most 50-year-olds because they took the time to build that base. Okay, so if that's you right now, that's your wake-up call. If you're not getting some weight training in, to make sure that you really have a base and understanding of implementing it, starting there, and making sure that you look after that function and full body in some sort of way. Okay, and weight training is the best way to do it, outside of obviously that nutrition side and having a nice recovery base. The second part here, and simple thought process that I want to indoctrinate you with, is this idea of train the muscle, not the movement. Okay, this very much comes back to the full range of motion, which is irrelevant to you. It's active range of motion. What you can actually use, what functions and fires, what range can you really work through to make sure that things are actually feeling good and you're in a safe position. Okay, just trying to make sure I bring you up on Facebook any questions or any comments I can dive in from there. Next part here, obviously, that comes back to that stress component. So looking at your work stress, looking at your ability to get deep quality sleep, and making sure you're in a position that the body's actually in a position to respond from training. So looking into that piece, making sure that your nutrition and your sleep is very much taken into account so that you can get the most out of your training. Okay. And then the last one here is that fountain of youth. Everybody's looking for it in a pill, but it's essentially in the gym. Okay, it's in the weight room. Trying to make sure that if we can get some level of exercise component in there, and we're looking after our body in that way, creating a level of stimulus, and essentially that reproduction or re-stimulation of cells, that in itself is going to make a huge difference to how young you look and feel, because we're maintaining some level of strength there long after. Okay. Cool. Next one here. So hopefully that's given you a bit of background on why weight training should hopefully be in your program. If you're not doing that 1 or 2 a week already, I would suggest you start. There's an incredible amount of benefits there. Hopefully today has given you a bit of a snapshot as to where you should start or why you should implement it. And here's a simple first steps from, there's a lot of pieces that we dive into with our clients. And if you want to dive deeper, I'm more than happy to look into that. But as first steps, if you're wanting to know where to start, these are 4 areas that, as a general concept, I see very underutilized or just not understood. And if you can implement them into the way you move in the gym and the way you use weights, hey, I keep saying gym, but it's really just weight training in general. If that becomes home for you and you get a couple of dumbbells and a bench, then go for it. But it's just getting an idea of basic principles, concepts that should be there. Okay. So the first one here is that speed matters. And what I mean by this is not going faster, but going slower in the movement. Okay, if tempo is one area we dive into a lot with our clients, and that alone, if you're not taking into account tempos, it's amazing how many PTs and supposedly exercise professionals are not using it to make sure that with tempo, we can dramatically change the stimulus and response of an exercise, and we can progress in such a different fashion, and we can manipulate an entire workout over 12 weeks and build a fantastic progression, changing nothing but tempo. Okay, and essentially tempo is the ability to control down whether you're pausing or not at the bottom, up, and whether you're holding. Okay, so at a very basic level, it would be making sure that for most people that we see in the gym, if you can, through the next 4 or 5 weeks, if you're already training, simply add 3 seconds to the eccentric or the lengthening of the muscle on the way down, it's going to make a big difference to your training if you're just going through the motions and lifting weights. Okay, that in itself is going to create a lot more muscle breakdown. There's going to be a lot more stimulus, and that long-term afterburn effect will increase. Okay, the next part here is that stress control and recovery. So making sure that we are simply taking into account how we feel before we go to the gym or around those other times, because I had a conversation just before, right? If we've had our kid keeping us up all night and we feel like our sleep was really disrupted, then maybe, still keep that time for yourself, but maybe it becomes a lighter workout. It becomes a walk. It becomes a yoga session, something that's more parasympathetic or calming in nature, in order to actually allow us to continue moving forward. Because a lot of people are trying to drag themselves to the gym and work. There's kind of two areas, right? One, they're either not listening to the body and they're overtraining, or two, they're not listening to the body and they're undertraining. Okay, so find that base, make sure recovery is on point, and then we can really create a level of stimulus. The third one here, and this is really, really emphasized with our clients, and they see dramatic impacts with their joints, how their joints feel with their knees and back and all the rest, is diving in and making sure you really start and emphasize more with your back and glutes. Okay, if you know how to train these muscles properly, you really understand how important these are to your general function, and even improvement to how you run, how you bike, how you get off a chair makes a dramatic improvement. Okay, don't go straight into doing shoulders and chest and things that might be nice, but it doesn't change the function of those main movers as much as your back and glutes. Okay, and if you haven't checked out that back and glute program, comment below, just say back and glutes. I'm more than happy to send that through. That walks you through step by step how you should be getting that function and main movement in for those movements. So if it's an area you need to focus on, then that can be helpful. And then the last one here is simply focus on feeling. Okay, it sounds super simple, but there's less than 5-10% of people in gyms actually do this or implement it at any level. Okay, and it's the idea of, can I actually feel this muscle? Okay, the amount of guys that get out of a squat and they feel their knee, not their quads. The amount of guys that get off a bench press and they feel their shoulder, not their chest. Right? Get an idea of, am I actually feeling this muscle? Can I feel this contract? Am I controlling that? That's where the tempo again comes into control or into is helpful. Is trying to make sure, can I actually feel this muscle? And if I'm building that level of awareness around how I'm moving, you'll start to see what's fitting you and you're fitting it. So what I mean by that is a lot of people are trying to push themselves into machines that simply don't fit them. Okay, so start to make those changes. Maybe use a cable, use a different machine, use a dumbbell that really allows you to elicit that response, get that movement that works for your body, rather than jamming yourself in a position that really doesn't feel right. If a machine feels funky, there's a joint that's off, move to something else. It's not worth it. Okay. So that's all I want to dive into today, guys. If there's anything, I did chuck at the end. If you want to dive into this a little more and really look at how we can personalize this to you, this is certainly an area that I've really dived into and trained PTs around the country on really how effective training can be and how most people are leaving 60, 70, 80% of their results on the table by not taking the time to actually implement effective training. Okay. You slap that on top with effective nutrition and making sure you're taking into account your toxicity, your gut health, your overall function of the body, then it's a game changer, right? Making sure that things really work, making sure that you're in a position that you're actually working with your body, you're making the most of your time, and things that actually able to respond goes a very, very long way. All right. So I hope that was helpful, guys. That was all I really had for you today. There's anything there that I can answer for you or anything else, then let me know. I'll stick around and check in the comments soon. Aaron, good to have you on, mate. I will. You've actually got access to a lot of that inside the private group, so I'll send you through a couple of things there. And for everyone else that's watching live, great to have you on. And I hope you got a ton of value out of that. I'll talk later, and have a great rest of your week.